Unlock the power of your mind. This is Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today. The next hour is devoted to learning something more, not just about the world of shoes and chips and sealing wax, as we like to say around here, but about how, what, and why we believe as we do. A time for the open-minded and a time for those willing to question what they think they know or what they may believe, those willing to be uncertain for an hour. I'm Eldon Taylor, and this is Provocative Enlightenment. All right, my partner Ravinder is here in the studio with me, so Rav, say hello to everyone and share your special insight for the day.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm so glad that you could join us for another exciting show. I really like that front-end piece you have where you talk about being willing to be uncertain for an hour. I wonder if that was Freudian. I think that is just really important. My wisdom for today, right here today we have got ice, rain, sleet, snow, and rain all mixed in together. So the ground is really, really slippery. So obviously the wisdom for today is look where you're walking. Take your time, look down, step carefully. And that, of course, holds for life in general. So,
interesting. Now, listen, you have a conversation that goes on during the radio show, and it's on the After Chat, Eldon Taylor's After Chat on Facebook. Tell people how they could participate in that conversation. I had several remarks last week about, what happened to the chat room? Well, you moved it to a Facebook page, so tell folks about that.
That's true. I have moved it to a Facebook page. It's a private Facebook page, but all you need do is to either friend Eldon or I on Facebook and ask to be added into the group, and then we can do that. So if you're doing it while we're on the air, then friend me because I am right here. He won't be looking at Facebook, or he better not be looking at Facebook while we're on the air. Simply friend me on Facebook, send me a private message, and I will get you added to our After Chat group.
All right. In this week's Spotlight, I wish to ask the question, what if everything you believed was wrong? Pause for a moment and ask yourself, what if the manner in which you piloted your life was constructed from error, false beliefs, groundless foundations, incorrect assumptions, and so forth? What would that mean to you, to how you live, to what you prioritize, with whom you associate, etc.? There are many things that we think and believe that time tends to lay bare as undeserving of our investment in their veracity. Take, for example, the beliefs of many in our older, still living generation, and of those generations that precede that, of the past. Some of these old beliefs that we're so heavily invested in as to still invade our personal and political landscape today include such things as slavery, women's rights, sexual attitudes, and more. Think about it this way. Men who are today in their 70s and older remember well the 50s, 60s, and 70s of the last century. The classic books then included works banned today, such as Tom Sawyer's Huckleberry Finn, required reading in school. Some books considered classics or semi-classics today, such as Lady Chatterley's Lover and James Joyce's Ulysses, were banned back then. Values are different, as were priorities. In the 50s, most women stayed home to raise their children, while men prided themselves in being the family's sole survivor. Many men felt shame if their wives had to work in order to make ends meet. My lovely bride likes to think about context when it comes to how older people deal with today's PC attitudes. She is quick to point out the plight of Paula Deen by way of an example. Deen was asked under oath if she had ever used the N-word. She admitted she had, way back when. The when did not matter. The fact was she had used this vile term and she admitted it. As a result, her show was canceled and she was financially devastated. Now, Paula Deen grew up at a time when everyone used the word. Regardless of whether it was right or wrong to do so by today's standards, back then it was normal and ordinary, and we all seek to be considered normal. As such, how fair is it to blame her for what was normal in her society as she grew up, a word that was in common use and which she said she had used once? It doesn't make it right, but think of the context. We sometimes think of old beliefs, such as burning witches in Salem, as the dark ages of ignorance. But it wasn't long ago that the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, used by all healthcare professionals, described gay behavior as a mental disorder. The fact is, in the 50s and 60s, some therapists employed aversion therapy of a kind, the kind featured in A Clockwork Orange, to cure male homosexuality. It wasn't until 1987 that homosexuality completely fell out of the DSM. The world is changing and doing so rapidly. In the near future, we're very likely to have forms of artificial intelligence walking around looking very similar to human beings. The Japanese are already selling human-looking dolls, and at least one entrepreneur in the United Kingdom is buying them up for use in a brothel. We have cloning technology, but resist human clones for reasons that can only be based on religious beliefs. We are able today to modify the DNA of our unborn children. We can even design the perfect child in theory. Tomorrow we could have designer babies that are so much smarter, stronger, faster, more athletic, and capable of much more than today's average person as to represent a new level of human evolution. What will prevent this, especially for those with the very deep pockets necessary to afford it? So I ask myself every day, what if that which I held sacred and true, everything I believed, crumbled like the sea castle on a sandy beach because it was based on a faulty foundation? What if? For me, and just for me, asking this question while seriously remaining open to modifying my beliefs based on solid groundwork is a fundamental part of self-actualization. One thing is for sure. Some of what we all believe today will be of the Dark Ages in the not-too-distant future. My thoughts anyway. What are yours, Ravinder?
You know, there's lots of different directions you can go based on what you were talking about. I think it is a really important question. What if everything you believed was wrong? Part of my own personal life philosophy follows that to some degree. I mean, I often think about how would I feel about these actions that I'm doing today when I'm on my deathbed? Will I feel that I have done my best? What if I was wrong? You know, what is the best way to live? So I think that is really important. But it has really practical applications too. You know, as you said, the Paula Deen story bugs the hell out of me. Because what was normal back then is being judged today. I think today I think of myself as a feminist. I never really thought about it before, but as more of that stuff comes up, it's like, you know, I am firmly in that camp. But the last thing I would want to do is go back in the past and condemn every man who said something that would be offensive today. And everyone did. It was just part of what was normal, and things will change. And as you were going to add in your blurb there, one of the things that I'm hoping will change, and I fully expect to change, will be the way animals are treated. Veganism is really important. Animal rights is just really important to me, but I think they're important to everyone. There is just this mass belief out there that it's normal to eat meat, and so therefore you have to do these things like buy the cheapest meat at the store, and who cares how the animals are treated, blah, blah, because everyone's doing it. It's normal, and it goes into the same category as Paula Deen using the N-word. So stop and think. Decide who it is you are and the kind of person you want to be. Stop trying to be normal. There you go. That's great wisdom, isn't it? Stop trying to be normal.
The only reason, the whole animal cruelty and whatnot with it, there are so many other examples that we live with today, was just time. As it was, today's spotlight was longer than I normally do.
And it's my soapbox, so we try not to get on my soapbox too much,
well, that's
so forgive
fine.
me.
That's why you get the opportunity to comment. All right. Every week I read some of your letters as our way of involving you while paying respect to the very important role you play in making this show successful. Last week our show featured Caroline Sutherland. We spoke about her work and books, The Body Knows. Jill wrote, I love Caroline's books. They probably saved my life. R.T. wrote, years ago, Caroline told me that I should give up dairy. At that time, I just ignored this advice. I did not think much of it. Then I decided to go vegan, only to learn for myself the health benefits I experienced dropping the dairy. Brian commented, Caroline is a great way to start the year. Dr. Peggy commented on last week's Spotlight regarding humility. I love that show, Lucifer. Yes, it is irreverent, but it is also fun to see things from a totally different perspective. Thank you for mentioning it. I hope more people will watch this so they can continue to offer thought-provoking, well-directed content. I have found myself contemplating my innermost thoughts and desires based on this series, too. It is always good to strive for more clarity and to be a better person to all. Craig also commented on last week's Spotlight. Eldon, you are so right. Living in humility is not weak, but actually very fulfilling and a really powerful way to live. Living a life of humility was and is how I want to live my remaining years. Thank you for everything you and Ravinder do. Moving on, Ajira wrote, I have dozens of your Inner Talk CDs, and I love them. Okay, that's all the time that we're going to take for letters today, but we do love your comments, so please keep them coming. You can opine by writing to me at Eldon, that's ELDON, at eldontaylor.com, or by joining me on Facebook at Dr. Eldon Taylor. We do sincerely appreciate your thoughts and ideas. Now to today's show. Finding Purpose in a Godless World, Why We Care, Even If the Universe Doesn't, with author Dr. Ralph Lewis. Now, Dr. Lewis has been with us before, but in case you missed that show, let me tell you a little about him. Dr. Lewis is a psychiatrist at Sunnybrook Health Science Center in Toronto, Canada, an assistant professor of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Toronto, and a psycho-oncology consultant at the Odette Cancer Center in Toronto. Dr. Lewis obtained his medical degree in 1990. He completed specialty training in psychiatry at the University of Toronto in 1996, followed by a 2-year fellowship in neuroimaging research and a Master of Science in Neuroscience, both at the University of Toronto. He has held his present staff physician appointment at Sunnybrook since 1998. Okay, on that, let's get him in here. Welcome back to Provocative Enlightenment, Dr. Ralph Lewis.
Hello, Eldon. It's such a pleasure to be back on your show.
It's good to have you back, Doctor. And as I said last time you were here, there are so many more thought-provoking ideas in your book that I just really want to, to flesh that out. I may not share, as you know, some of your conclusions, but your thought process and the alternatives, they're rigorous. This is a well-written book, and I recommend it to everyone because if we don't consider these possibilities, we remain indefinitely ignorant. That's my point of view anyway. Okay, as you know, we like to know 3 things on the show. Who's the messenger? What is the message? And, of course, how do we use it? So let's begin this way. What are you passionate about, and when did you lose your belief in God?
I'm passionate, as I said last time, about people. I'm in a people-oriented specialty. I'm interested in people. I find people endlessly fascinating. Psychiatry may be stressful, but it is never boring. It's endlessly intriguing. As to my own belief, as I said last time, I considered myself agnostic for most of my life. I transitioned to a position of atheism roughly a decade ago. I respect religion, and I admire the insights that religion offers, philosophical and psychological insights, and I actually still adhere to religious traditions without the belief, just from a cultural point of view. So I think I said last time, I'm quite sentimental about tradition and heritage, and my own cultural heritage is Judaism.
All right. Doctor, you heard today's spotlight. What are your thoughts regarding the nature of our changing values? I mean, indeed, arguably, your book offers a set of alternatives that may become a standard in the not-too-distant future. So what are your thoughts regarding the nature of our changing values and the impact some of our beliefs have, particularly on the advancement of science and knowledge in general?
Well, I think you made some really excellent points, reminding us of just how radically, how profoundly our values and beliefs have changed and continue to change, and much of this in recent living memory. So, yes, I'm certainly interested in how science is having a huge influence on our worldview, and so I'm interested from many different angles in how people form their worldviews, what those worldviews are, and the degree to which worldview is now increasingly based on a scientific perspective. And, science has become practically synonymous with atheism. And I actually just wrote a blog about this less than a week ago, asking and wondering, how did that happen? How come most senior scientists are non-believers, and how come science is practically synonymous with atheism? And
that's particularly true in the United Kingdom. Less so here, but particularly true. And by the way, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I read your blog. It's an outstanding piece. Tell everybody that's listening how they could look at that blog, and then please continue. Again, I don't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. So it's on Psychology Today online. So if they simply Google Psychology Today and my name, they will quickly find it.
Okay, and please then pick it up and continue.
Yeah. Okay, so actually the title of that blog was Profoundly Challenging Questions to Ask an Atheist, and the subtitle was Theism Must Explain the Problem of Evil, Atheism Must Explain Everything Else. And
yeah.
the question I'm asking is, well, surely it's impossible to explain everything else. And by everything else, I mean the biggest questions of the origin of the universe, the origin of life, the origin of consciousness, the origin and coherence of values. How do we have purpose, meaning, and morality in a universe that, according to science, is fundamentally random and lacking those very properties of purpose, meaning, and morality? So I'm not claiming, nobody is claiming that science has all the answers, but the point made in the blog is that science has progressed to such a degree that it now offers at least plausible models, plausible hypotheses to address each one of those big questions. And the models, the hypotheses that science offers are far more coherent and compelling. And as I said, they fit the data far more tightly than any prior worldview, and those would be religious and spiritual worldviews. So while science does not know the answers for sure, we're now at a point in this century, in the last couple of decades, of having many elements of a coherent, comprehensive worldview snap into place, and it's very, very compelling. So if anything is going to shift people's values and beliefs radically, I think this is the most likely to do so. And I made the point that I think in this information revolution and this stage of science that quite possibly this represents what I call a tipping point in the intellectual history of humankind.
All right. Let's look at this, I guess, philosophically for a moment. Rick Warren sold some 30 million copies of his book, The Purpose-Driven Life. Your book addresses human purpose from a diametrically opposing perspective. What is a purpose-driven life without God?
Well, the traditional belief, as articulated very well by Rick Warren, is that in the beginning there was purpose. In the beginning there was a higher power and with a higher purpose, and the universe was created and designed with purpose in mind. The scientific worldview is the exact opposite, which is that in the beginning there was no purpose. There was randomness and chaos, and in fact, taking it steps earlier, there was quite possibly nothing at all, nothing whatsoever, although that's where it gets much more speculative and hypothetical, and there are different theories about the origin of origins. But certainly from the scientific point of view, the early universe lacked any purpose. So how and when did purpose enter the universe? It entered the universe with life itself. Now, life on this planet evolved some 4 billion years ago, and we don't know if life emerged elsewhere in the universe, so there's a high probability that it did, and we don't know when that would have been, but it would be a good guess that it was certainly many, many billions of years after the Big Bang, after the origin of the universe. It couldn't have been sooner than that. So how does purpose emerge with life? Well, the most simple elementary organisms are purpose-driven. The simplest organisms today, organisms like bacteria and simpler than that even, are by definition purpose-driven. And the purpose, of course, at the most elementary level is to survive and replicate. But purpose becomes elaborated as organisms become elaborated. So as organisms become more and more complex under the influence of evolution, which is a blind, unguided process, so purpose itself becomes elaborated. And at a certain point, organisms are so complex in their nervous systems that consciousness enters the picture, at first in a very rudimentary way. And when consciousness emerges, then purpose becomes a conscious process. First, very simple, but then in increasingly complex animals, much more elaborated. And what we have is a runaway evolutionary process of increasing complexity with extravagantly elaborated purpose as we witness and experience subjectively in ourselves, Homo sapiens.
All right. When we come back, I'm going to pick it up there. I want to know what you think about. I mean, everybody talks about atheism, and then they group a whole lot of ideas in it. And so the atheist doesn't accept that there's any such thing as precognition, any such thing as anomalous sorts of, I'll put it in quotation marks, miracles, etc. I'm going to come at you about what your ideas are regarding that. We're speaking with Dr. Ralph Lewis about his work and book, Finding Purpose in a Godless World, Why We Care Even If the Universe Doesn't. You can learn more about our guest by visiting his website at purposewithoutgod.com. Okay, do please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Change has never been easier. Whether you wish to lose weight, stop smoking, build better relationships, become creative, enjoy ultra prosperity, or simply relax and promote self-healing, InnerTalk has been repeatedly demonstrated effective in the most rigorous of scientific studies. Our customers love InnerTalk. Sean wrote, "I have struggled with bulimia for over 30 years and have never been able to lose weight without restoring to it until I used InnerTalk." Vicky wrote, "My hubby has been using the Stop Snoring CD and already his dangerous and raucous snoring levels have stopped." Celeste wrote, "I recently graduated from Taft Law School with honors. I'm writing to tell you how much your InnerTalk CD, Excel in Exams, has helped me. With over 300 titles to choose from, there is something for everyone. Check it out today by going to innertalk.com.
Unlock the power of your mind. This is Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Welcome back. If you just joined us, we're chatting with Dr. Ralph Lewis about his work and book, Finding Purpose in a Godless World, Why We Care Even If the Universe Doesn't. This is a very provocative read. I recommend it. To me, it doesn't matter if you're a secular humanist, an atheist, an agnostic, or a Christian mystic. Choose what your faith might be and how invested you are in it. In fact, I want to share something with you about this book. Tony Van Pelt, president of the Institute for Sciences and Human Values, says this about Dr. Lewis's book. In Finding Purpose in a Godless World, psychiatrist Ralph Lewis presents an interdisciplinary view of how our purpose, morality, and meaning evolved. Dr. Lewis exemplifies an abiding respect for humans and their individual, complicated journeys through life, but is never patronizing. On behalf of reason and purpose, secular humanists, too, would do well to become emissaries for compassion and understanding. Close quote. Again, a very provocative read. I don't care what your belief is. Definitely something that I believe we should be aware of and we should entertain. If we want truly to have considered all alternatives and not just to have been puppeted into what our current beliefs are. All right, again, you can learn more about our guest by visiting his website at purposewithoutgod.com, and or as Dr. Lewis indicated, go to Psychology Today, input Dr. Lewis, Dr. Ralph Lewis, together with once there, and you'll find his blogs, and they are worthwhile entertaining, reading as well. All right, every week, we ask our guests for their favorite music that has some real meaning to them, because as you know by now, music psychology is an avocation of mine. And, it has some practical relevance in many areas. So today, Doctor, you chose Paul Simon's American Tune. Tell us, why is this music important to you, and how does it inform us, moreover, about just who you are?
Well, I've always been a Paul Simon fan, and I love many of his songs. This one particularly strikes a chord. It speaks to, for me, to the uncertainty that so many people have in maintaining a sense of purpose in their lives, and especially when people are just so exhausted, so drained from overwork in the daily grind. It's that feeling of weariness and the confusion that people often feel in life. I should say that I find this song very melancholic, and I'm not a melancholic person. I'm actually quite an upbeat person. So I hope it doesn't depress people, but I think it speaks to uncertainty, and it was written by the way at another uncertain time in American politics in the mid-'70s, just when Nixon was elected. But I think it resonates perhaps for many people in these times, in America in particular.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, a couple of things here before I jump you to anomalies. First, I want everybody to understand that you're a medical doctor, and we established when you were last on the show that you're what I termed a pragmatic atheist, in that you support patients who find comfort in their theistic beliefs.
Absolutely.
Referring to that, Doc, does it ever disturb you to see patients who do cling tenaciously to some spiritual belief in face of a certain undesirable income or outcome?
As I think I said last time, spirituality or religion can be very helpful for many people when facing terrible adversity. It does give many people hope and comfort and strength, except when it doesn't. And unfortunately, I've dealt with all too many patients whose belief was shattered. They were left so confused and so bewildered about their worldview because of just the intensity and apparent arbitrariness of the adversity that hit them. And the obvious question that people ask is, why me? Why did this happen? What does God have in mind for me? Right. And that's very, very hard for many people.
All right. As a psychiatrist, what you just described twice now, back to back, both about the music and about why me, is a state of uncertainty. And, the spotlight today essentially was, I believe that we should be uncertain, that uncertainty is healthy. But as a psychiatrist, just how healthy or unhealthy is uncertainty? Or are there parameters that differentiate the form of uncertainty?
That is such a good question, Eldon. And I'm often left struggling to figure out the answer to exactly that question. And I'm sure I'm often wrong about that in my judgment as to whether a certain patient ought to be more uncertain or, in fact, helped to get back to a state of certainty, even if it's false certainty. As I think I said last time, my goal as a psychiatrist is to help people to be less distressed and to function better. My goal is not necessarily to help them to have a more realistic worldview, at least on the philosophical level. I do try to help people to be more realistic on the practical day-to-day level. But, for many people, honestly, are better off with their belief systems, even if they're based on wishful thinking rather than reality. They function better and are more comforted by those beliefs. As I said, except when the beliefs fail them, and that too is unpredictable. I never know if a person is going to be comforted or not by religious and spiritual beliefs. But for myself and for many people, I prefer to be as reality-based as possible. And for me, understanding that life and the universe are fundamentally random is actually comforting. It's comforting because it helps me with acceptance, and it helps me to not look around in a futile way for reasons that don't exist. It helps me to not blame myself. It helps me to not blame God. If I were to believe in God, I think I would be very angry with God in many situations. And it helps. It just helps me and many people to accept and move on once we understand that a lot of things happen that are just beyond our control. And it's not very different in that way from the famous serenity prayer. It's just that the difference is that this is a worldview that accepts that fundamentally many things are not only out of our control, but don't have reasons, or the reasons are not helpful. They're molecular reasons and things like that.
I got you. So instead of let go and let God, it's let go and let randomness?
I guess you could say that, yeah.
Okay, that's... Let me pursue that, if I may. Placebo and nocebo research shows us clearly the value of belief, at least in the area of wellness. We don't think of that as random. I suppose in the sense that, well, if I believe, then that's not too awful random. But just what is that fine line between, as a medical professional doctor, promoting the idea of wellness, which itself is part of the foundation to all placebo research, as opposed to dealing with a patient as though the world were random?
Yeah, again, I often don't know where to draw that line. I do try to take my cue from my patients, but to be more concrete about it, I guess we could apply the question to placebo effects of medications such as antidepressants.
Right.
To what degree is it helpful to promote the expectation of improvement from an antidepressant, which is what drives the placebo effect, versus being realistic with a patient right from the beginning that these medications are not wonderfully effective on average, statistically.
Right.
On average, statistically, they're modest in their effect.
You're a mind reader.
I tend to give people realistic information because I'm concerned about the risk of disappointment and frustration if I set high expectations and the medication fails.
You're a mind reader. I was about to fractionate that with, the effect of some drugs, and you used a perfect example, that when we invest in their belief, they work. But indeed, the data shows, hard data shows, that they're basically ineffective. So that's a fine line that I suppose you take responsibility for it. That's what I'm hearing from you. And instead of promoting something you don't think is effective, you try to convey more a factual basis, plus or minus the patient, because I can see, or I'm interpreting from what you're telling me, that if you truly believed that the only way this patient is going to positively respond is if you do medicate him, you would probably medicate him. Have I got that right, or am I way out in left field?
Well, I should just clarify one thing, just to adjust
Please.
what you said. So these medications are effective. They do have a real effect over and above placebo, but it's not a dramatic effect. In fact, one of the biggest meta-analysis studies ever done was completed last year, a very rigorous study, and basically showed that on average, and it's important to emphasize that this is an average, antidepressants are about 55% effective, and placebo is about 35% effective. So the real difference is about 20%, which is very modest, but still very real. And I must emphasize this is an average. So, of course, there are individuals who get dramatic improvement, and it is real improvement, but that balances out against people who get no improvement, and then there's everyone in between.
Okay, with that qualification, though, I'm going to come back to, do you medicate first, or do you attempt to go without medication and deal with alternative methods to releasing depression, anxiety, etc., when you're dealing with that kind of patient?
Yeah, well, by alternative, I'm assuming you mean psychotherapy, which of course is not alternative. It's mainstream, and it has its own.
I don't mean alternative like in complementary medicine. No.
Right. Yeah,
as opposed to, yeah.
Yeah, the simple rule of thumb, but of course every case has to be assessed on its merits, but the simple rule of thumb is mild depression, go with psychotherapy on its own first. Severe depression, medicate as soon as possible, with psychotherapy added as soon as the patient is well enough to engage in it. And moderate depression, go with both, but give the patient the option, explaining carefully the pros and cons, the risks and side effects, and so on, but recommend they consider both simultaneously.
Okay, we got a little aside from your book, and I apologize for that. I just jumped, but one thought precipitates another, followed by still another. I'm going to come back to your book. I'm going to come back to the perspective in your book. When I talk to atheists, and I've had many of them on this show, including Michael Shermer, who wrote the foreword for your book, there's an inherent built-in opposition to alternatives that are rejected generally by reductionistic, mechanistic perspectives. So, anomalies, what William James called white crows, things like precognition, things like Rupert Sheldrake's, why dogs know or how dogs know that you're coming home before, that entire area of what we shall call supernatural, but I'm not going psychic, if you will. I'm trying to stay more in the area where there is solid research. When you look at that body of information, how do you fit it with an atheistic perspective or agnostic perspective, and or in the alternative, do you just reject it?
Well, having said earlier that science is practically synonymous with an atheistic perspective these days, the rejection of the kinds of phenomena that you listed is not an atheistic perspective, it's a scientific perspective that most scientists would agree that on the point of rejecting those phenomena as being real and explaining them away as poor methodology or psychological effects and various biases, confirmation bias, hindsight bias, and a whole lot more. So that's science that is saying that, and many of those scientists may not necessarily be atheists themselves. So it's not an atheistic perspective only to reject those phenomena. But yes, I myself, from a science point of view, reject the phenomena that you've listed because there are so many better explanations for why people think that they're seeing a real effect. You know, coming back to antidepressants, because it's not that far away from my book, actually, it's a relevant point. It's much harder than most people appreciate to demonstrate scientifically with a high level of rigor and confidence that A is the cause of B, that antidepressants are the cause, however modestly, of the improvement of depression. So many confounding variables and biases creep in that you actually have to be obsessive and have enormous resources to do a well-designed study to demonstrate these things with confidence. And the problem with all the alternative phenomena, paranormal phenomena that you mentioned, is the quality of the methodology and the failure to exclude all of the confounding variables and subjectivity and bias. They just don't stand up to rigorous analysis. That's the reason for rejecting them.
Well, and I'm going to disagree with you there because I've read a couple of them, like Dean Radin's latest work on random number generators that is very rigorous and has been replicated now by 3 other scientists, one of which I know rejected it out of hand as a possibility in the beginning. But that's in a very different sense. I guess let me go this way quickly. There's some evidence that mind operates at a distance. Indeed, I know a biologist who insists that he has divided glial cells from a petri dish and taken some out of the lab, while back in the lab he's stimulated the remaining glial cells electrically to have them respond remotely simultaneously. Is there such a thing in your view as mind operating in some way that fits into your scheme of things? It doesn't necessitate a spiritual perspective, or do you reject that also, sir?
Well, let me just preface my rejection by saying that I have the utmost respect for the people who do believe that this is true, and the people who are doing this research. These are intelligent, educated people, and their intentions are certainly noble. But I do reject all of that, and for lots of reasons. Mostly it's the research methodology, which just, as I said, it's not sufficiently rigorous in excluding the confounding variables. But not only that, if these kinds of phenomena were actually true, practically all of the rest of science would have to be false. It's a plausibility problem. It's incompatible with everything else that we know about the laws of nature and about how the world works from centuries of science, and especially the last few decades of science. So science in its entirety almost would have to be spectacularly wrong for those phenomena to actually be real. But we have much better explanations for why people imagine that they're seeing a real effect.
Well, there are many people today that argue Kuhn's absolutely right. We are ready for a paradigm shift, and we opened this show with, maybe we should hold in suspense some of the things that we cherish most. I'm uncertain. I know this. My personal life has revealed experiences that I can't explain. I want to be a scientist. I try to apply logic and reason. I'm a student of philosophy. At the same time, I come up with these nagging feelings that don't allow me to become an atheist or an agnostic. But I'll tell you, Dr. Lewis, I highly recommend your book. I really appreciate your time and your willingness to share it with us. We're out of time. Well, we've come to the end of another episode of Provocative Enlightenment. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed our show and will join us again next week. Okay, until then, wherever you are in the world, remember, believing in yourself always matters.
Provocative Enlightenment has been brought to you by Progressive Awareness Research and other sponsors. Provocative Enlightenment is a syndicated show and appears on other networks. For a schedule of show times, visit provocativeenlightenment.com. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, write to Eldon at eldontaylor.com.